with Crosstech Enterprises, a rapidly growing tech company that had recently relocated their headquarters to Austin. The project required him to work closely with their VP of Business Development, a woman named Vanessa Cross, who seemed to exist in a completely different stratosphere than the rest of us. Vanessa was 32, Harvard MBA, and had supposedly turned around 3 failing companies before she was 30. She lived in a penthouse downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lady Bird Lake. She drove a white Tesla Model S and wore designer suits that probably cost more than I made in a month. Tyler would come home from meetings with her talking about her insights, her connections, her sophisticated approach to business strategy. At first, I tried to be supportive. When Tyler would mention Vanessa's latest brilliant idea or share something impressive she'd accomplished, I'd nod and ask questions and try to learn from her example. But gradually, I started noticing changes in how Tyler looked at me, how he responded to my own work stories, how he seemed increasingly impatient with my concerns about my job or my dreams of eventually starting my own agency. The turning point came at Morrison & Associates' annual holiday party in December. Tyler had been talking about this event for weeks. How important it was for his career. How all the senior partners would be there. How this was his chance to make a real impression. He bought me a black cocktail dress for the occasion, something more expensive than I would have chosen but undeniably elegant. The party was held at the Driscoll Hotel, in one of those grand ballrooms with crystal chandeliers and marble floors that made you feel like you were in a movie. Tyler introduced me to his colleagues, his arm around my waist, proud and affectionate. I met his mentor, David Morrison's nephew, who was being groomed for partnership. I chatted with the other junior associates and their partners, sharing stories about our work and our plans for the new year. Everything was going perfectly until Vanessa arrived. She walked into that ballroom like she owned it, wearing a midnight blue dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her dark hair swept up in an elegant chignon that looked effortless, but had probably taken a professional stylist an hour to perfect. She moved through the room with the kind of confidence that drew attention without seeming to seek it, stopping to chat with senior partners like they were old friends, laughing at their stories with genuine warmth that made them light up. I watched Tyler watch her, and something shifted in his expression. It wasn't just attraction, though there was that too. It was something closer to awe, like he was seeing a version of success he'd only dreamed of. When she approached our group, Tyler straightened his shoulders and smiled in a way I hadn't seen before, eager and slightly nervous. "Tyler," she said, extending her hand with a smile that was both professional and warmly personal. "I've been looking forward to meeting your girlfriend. I've heard so much about you, Emma." I shook her hand, trying to match her confident energy, but feeling suddenly aware of my thrift store earrings and the small run in my stockings that I'd hoped no one would notice. "It's nice to meet you too. Tyler's told me a lot about the project you're working on together. He's been incredible to work with," she said, and Tyler practically glowed. "Such innovative thinking. I was just telling Richard Morrison that Tyler has exactly the kind of strategic mindset we look for in senior-level consulting." The conversation that followed was perfectly pleasant on the surface. Vanessa asked about my work at Brightwave, listened attentively to my answers, and even complimented a campaign I mentioned that had performed well for a local restaurant chain. But underneath her politeness, I felt something that made my stomach tighten. Not malice exactly, but a kind of casual assessment, like she was taking inventory of who I was and finding me interesting but ultimately inconsequential. The real moment of realization came when someone mentioned the new marketing initiative that Crosstech was planning for the following quarter. Vanessa started describing her vision for an integrated digital strategy that would span multiple platforms and incorporate some cutting-edge data analytics tools I'd never heard of. Tyler was hanging on every word, asking sophisticated questions about implementation and ROI that showed he'd been thinking deeply about these concepts. I tried to contribute to the conversation, mentioning a similar campaign we'd discussed at Brightwave, but the moment I started talking, I realized how small-scale and basic our project sounded compared to what they were describing. Vanessa nodded politely, but I could see in her eyes that she was placing me in a completely different category than Tyler. He was someone worth cultivating, someone with potential to operate at her level. I was someone's nice girlfriend, who worked at a cute little startup. The drive home that night was quiet. Tyler seemed lost in thought, replaying conversations from the party. occasionally mentioning something impressive that someone had said or some connection he'd made. When I tried to share my own observations about the evening, he responded with distracted MHMMS that made it clear his mind was elsewhere. Over the next few months, Tyler's work relationship with Vanessa deepened. The project that was supposed to last 8 weeks stretched to 12, then 16. Tyler started working later, traveling more frequently to Crosstech's offices, and coming home with stories about strategy sessions over dinner, networking events that Vanessa had invited him to, and opportunities she was helping him explore. I started to feel like a supporting character in my own relationship. Tyler would come home energized from his day, full of excitement about new business concepts and expansion strategies. But when I'd try to share my own work experiences or ideas, he'd listen with the kind of polite attention you give to a child describing their day at school. Not dismissive, exactly, but not genuinely engaged either. The shift was subtle at first. He stopped asking about my projects at Brightwave. When I'd mention challenges I was facing or successes I was excited about, he'd offer brief advice that felt more like he was checking a box than actually helping. When I'd suggest we go somewhere or do something together, he'd often counter with events that he'd heard about through Vanessa or her network, places that were more expensive and sophisticated than our usual spots. I tried to adapt. I started reading business publications that Tyler mentioned, trying to educate myself about concepts and trends that seemed important to him. I updated my wardrobe, buying pieces that looked more professional even though they stretched my budget. I suggested we network more, attend more industry events, position ourselves as a couple that was serious about career advancement. But the harder I tried to fit into Tyler's evolving vision of success, the more I felt like I was losing myself. The things I'd always loved about our relationship, the easy conversations and shared discoveries and comfortable silences, started feeling strained. Tyler seemed to be measuring everything against some new standard that I couldn't quite grasp or meet. The end came on a Tuesday evening in March. Tyler had been working late again, something that had become routine. I'd made dinner, something simple but nice, and was waiting for him at our usual spot at the kitchen counter, where we'd always shared our days with each other. When he finally got home at almost 9 o'clock, he seemed distracted and tense. "How was your day?" I asked, the same question I'd been asking for 3 years. "Fine," he said, loosening his tie and avoiding my eyes. "Busy." I tried to tell him about a new client we'd landed at Brightwave, a local tech startup that needed help with their digital marketing strategy. It was the kind of project I'd been hoping for, creative and challenging, with a client who appreciated innovative approaches. But as I talked, I could see Tyler's attention drifting. He was checking his phone, responding. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story, to what looked like text messages from work. "Tyler," I said finally, "are we okay?" He looked up from his phone, and for a moment, I saw something in his expression that made my heart sink. Not anger or frustration, but something worse. Pity. "Emma," he said slowly, setting his phone down. "I think we need to talk." The conversation that followed was one of those that changes everything, where words are spoken that can't be taken back, and truths are revealed that can't be unknown. Tyler talked about how we'd grown in different directions, how he was starting to envision a different kind of future, how he needed to be with someone who shared his ambitions and could match his professional trajectory. He didn't mention Vanessa by name, but she was present in everything he said. When he talked about wanting a partner who understood business strategy, I thought of Vanessa's MBA and her corner office. When he mentioned needing someone who could navigate corporate social situations, I thought of how effortlessly she'd worked the room at the holiday party. When he said he wanted to build a life with someone who was already established in their career, I thought of her penthouse, and her Tesla, and her Harvard pedigree. "I care about you," Tyler said, and I believed that was true. "But I think we want different things. You're talented, Emma, you really are. But you're still figuring things out, still experimenting. I need to be with someone who's past that stage." "Someone like Vanessa," I said quietly. Tyler's face flushed, and I knew I was right. This isn't about Vanessa, isn't it? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. That weekend, Tyler moved his things out of my apartment. It was a surprisingly quick process, considering we'd been together for 3 years. Clothes, books, the expensive coffee maker he'd bought, his collection of business biographies, the framed photo of us from last year's South by Southwest that had been sitting on my dresser for months. Within a few hours, almost every trace of our shared life was packed into boxes and loaded into his Honda Civic. I helped him carry things to his car, both of us trying to maintain some dignity in the face of such a complete ending. As he loaded the last box into his trunk, Tyler turned to me with an expression that was trying to be kind, but came across as condescending. "You're going to be fine, Emma," he said. "You're smart and creative, and you'll find your path. It just might take a while." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "And who knows," he added with a smile that was probably meant to be encouraging, "maybe this will be good for both of us. Maybe you needed this push to really focus on your career." After he left, I sat in my suddenly too quiet apartment and tried to make sense of what had just happened. 3 years. Gone. Plans we'd made, dreams we'd shared, a future we'd been building together, all of it dismantled in the space of a single conversation. I felt like I'd been living in a house that I thought was solid, only to discover that the foundation had been crumbling for months without my noticing. The worst part wasn't the heartbreak, though that was real and deep. The worst part was the doubt that Tyler's words had planted in my mind. Was I really just figuring things out? Was my work at Brightwave just experimental, unserious, a stepping stone to something more legitimate? Was I actually behind where I should be at 25, lacking some crucial understanding about success and ambition that people like Vanessa possessed naturally? I spent the next week moving through my routines like a ghost. I went to work, participated in meetings, completed projects, but everything felt muted and distant. My colleagues at Brightwave were kind, asking gentle questions about how I was doing, offering to grab coffee or lunch. But I couldn't bring myself to explain what had happened. How do you tell people that your boyfriend of 3 years left you because you weren't successful enough? How do you admit that maybe he was right? 2 weeks after the breakup, I was scrolling through Instagram when I saw it. Tyler and Vanessa at some networking event downtown, both of them dressed immaculately, Tyler's arm around her waist in a way that was clearly romantic rather than professional. They looked perfect together, like they'd stepped out of a business magazine feature about young professionals to watch. The caption was something about building the future together, with hashtags about innovation and partnership. I stared at that photo for longer than I should have, studying their faces, their body language, the expensive-looking venue behind them. They looked happy, but more than that, they looked like they belonged together in a way that Tyler and I never had. They were both polished, ambitious, operating at a level of professional sophistication that I'd never achieved. That night, I called my best friend Jess and told her everything. About the breakup, about Vanessa, about the growing feeling that maybe Tyler had been right about our fundamental incompatibility. Jess listened without interrupting, then said something that surprised me. "Emma, do you remember what you told me when you started at Brightwave?" I thought back to my first week at the startup, the excitement I'd felt about joining a team that valued creativity and innovation over corporate hierarchy and established processes. That it felt like the first place where I could actually make a difference? "You said it felt like the first place where your ideas mattered more than your pedigree," Jess corrected. "You said you wanted to build something meaningful, not just climb someone else's ladder." She was right. I had said that, and I'd meant it. But somewhere in the past year, I'd started measuring my worth by Tyler's standards, by the kind of success that Vanessa represented, rather than by my own values and goals. "Tyler left you because you weren't successful enough by his definition," Jess continued. "But what if his definition is wrong? What if there are different kinds of success, and yours just doesn't look like what he expected?" That conversation was the beginning of something that I couldn't have imagined that night at Moonshine when Tyler told me I was still figuring things out. Because Jess was right about one thing. I had been building something meaningful at Brightwave. I'd been learning, growing, developing skills and insights that were valuable in ways that couldn't be measured by salary or title or the size of your office. And soon, very soon, Tyler was going to discover just how wrong he'd been about my potential. But that Tuesday night in March, sitting in my apartment, surrounded by the empty spaces where Tyler's things used to be, I had no idea that this ending was actually a beginning. I had no idea that within 18 months I'd be sitting across a conference table from Tyler, watching him realize that the woman he'd dismissed as still figuring things out was about to become his boss. All I knew was that something had been broken that couldn't be fixed, and I had a choice to make. I could let Tyler's assessment of my worth define me, or I could prove to myself that success looked like a lot more than what he'd been able to imagine. I chose to prove him wrong. And that choice changed everything. The call came on a Thursday morning 18 months later, while I was reviewing quarterly projections in my corner office on the 15th floor of the Frostbank Tower. My assistant knocked gently on the glass door, holding up a finger to indicate an important call. "Emma, there's someone from Morrison & Associates on line 2. Says it's regarding a potential acquisition consultation." I paused, my coffee mug halfway to my lips. Morrison & Associates. Tyler's firm. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I kept my expression neutral. "Put them through." The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, unfamiliar. "Ms. Walsh, this is Jennifer Kim, senior partner at Morrison & Associates. We're reaching out because we understand your firm, Catalyst Digital Solutions, specializes in digital transformation consulting for mid-sized businesses." "That's correct," I said, leaning back in my leather chair and gazing out at the Austin skyline. From this height, I could see Lady Bird Lake glittering in the morning sun, the same view that Vanessa had enjoyed from her penthouse. "What can I do for you?" "We're considering expanding our digital services division, and we've heard impressive things about your methodology and client results. We'd like to discuss a potential partnership or acquisition opportunity. Would you be available for a meeting next week?" I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "I'd be happy to explore that conversation. Should I ask who recommended us?" There was a brief pause. "Actually, the recommendation came from one of our clients, Crosstech Enterprises. Vanessa Cross spoke very highly of your recent campaign work." The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor. After scheduling the meeting, I set down the phone and allowed myself a moment to appreciate the symmetry. Vanessa Cross, the woman Tyler had left me for, had just recommended my company to Tyler's firm. The same Vanessa who had once assessed me at that holiday party and found me interesting but inconsequential was now praising my work to potential business partners. But this moment didn't happen overnight. The path from that empty apartment in March to this corner office in September had been built on 18 months of decisions that Tyler never could have imagined I was capable of making. The transformation began 3 weeks after Tyler moved out, on a rainy Wednesday when everything at Brightwave seemed to fall apart at once. Our biggest client, a local restaurant chain, had decided to pull their account after the owner's nephew convinced him he could handle their social media for way cheaper. Our lead developer had given notice to join a startup that promised equity and unlimited kombucha. And our founder, Marcus, had called an all-hands meeting to announce that we were 2 months away from running out of operating capital. I sat in that converted warehouse space, listening to Marcus explain our options with the kind of forced optimism that fooled no one, and felt something crystallize inside me. This wasn't about Brightwave failing. This was about whether I was going to let circumstances happen to me or whether I was going to take control of my own trajectory. During the lunch break, while my colleagues sat around looking shell-shocked and updating their LinkedIn profiles, I walked outside into the drizzle and called David Chen, a business consultant who had given a talk at UT during my senior year about entrepreneurship and strategic planning. I'd kept his card for 3 years, never imagining I'd have the courage to use it. "David, this is Emma Walsh. You probably don't remember me, but I attended your lecture about startup strategy at UT Austin a few years ago." "Emma," he said, and I was surprised that he seemed to place the name immediately. "Of course I remember. You asked the question about sustainable growth versus rapid scaling. How can I help you?" I took a deep breath and jumped. "I think I want to start my own consulting firm and I have no idea what I'm doing." The coffee meeting that David suggested turned into a 3-hour strategy session that changed the entire trajectory of my career. David listened as I explained the situation at Brightwave, my experience with digital marketing, and my growing conviction that small and mid-sized businesses needed sophisticated marketing strategies but couldn't afford the big consulting firms that charged premium rates for junior associate work. "You're describing a real market gap," David said, leaning forward across the small table at Radio Coffee, the same place where Tyler had first asked me out. "But starting a consulting firm requires more than identifying an opportunity. You need credibility, capital, and clients. Do you have any of those?" I thought about my savings account, which contained enough money to cover maybe 2 months of living expenses. I thought about my professional network, which consisted mainly of people from Brightwave and some college friends who were still figuring out their own careers. I thought about my experience, which felt substantial to me but might not impress potential clients who expected consultants to have impressive credentials and established track records. "No," I admitted, "but I have something else." "What's that?" "I have nothing left to lose." David smiled for the first time during our conversation. That's actually a significant competitive advantage. He was right. The fear that had held me back for years, the fear of failure and judgment and not being good enough, had been replaced by something much more powerful. The knowledge that I'd already experienced the worst-case scenario of someone I loved telling me I wasn't successful enough. And I'd survived it. Over the next month, David helped me develop a business plan for what would become Catalyst Digital Solutions. The concept was straightforward. Provide mid-sized businesses with the kind of sophisticated digital marketing strategy that only Fortune 500 companies had previously been able to afford, but deliver it with the agility and personal attention that smaller firms needed. My first client came from an unexpected source. Maria Gonzalez, the owner of a local bakery chain, had been at the table next to Tyler and me that night at Moonshine when he broke up with me. She'd overheard enough of our conversation to piece together what was happening, and when she saw me working alone at a coffee shop a few weeks later, she approached me. "You're the marketing girl whose boyfriend was being an ass about your career," she said with characteristic directness. I laughed despite myself. "That's probably the most accurate job description I've ever heard." "Well, his loss. I've been watching your work with that restaurant chain, and their social media went from boring to brilliant after you started working with them. I've got 3 locations now, and I'm thinking about expanding to San Antonio, but I have no idea how to market to a bigger audience." Maria became my first client, paying me a modest retainer to develop a digital strategy for her expansion. The work wasn't glamorous or high profile, but it was mine. I spent hours researching San Antonio demographics, analyzing competitor strategies, and developing a comprehensive plan that included everything from social media content to Google ad campaigns to partnership opportunities with local food bloggers. The strategy worked. Maria's San Antonio location exceeded first-quarter projections by 30%, and she referred me to 2 other small business owners who were dealing with similar growth challenges. By the end of my second month as an independent consultant, I had 4 clients and was earning more than I'd made at Brightwave. But the real breakthrough came when I landed a project that nobody expected me to be capable of handling. Austin's food scene was exploding, with new restaurants opening every week and established places struggling to differentiate themselves in an increasingly crowded market. I developed a proposal for a collaborative marketing initiative that would help 10 local restaurants work together on cross-promotional campaigns, shared events, and coordinated social media strategies. The proposal required me to coordinate with multiple business owners, develop integrated campaigns across different platforms, and manage a marketing budget that was larger than anything I'd handled before. When I presented the concept at a meeting of the Austin Restaurant Association, I could see skepticism in some faces. I was 26 years old, working out of a shared workspace, and proposing to manage a 6-figure marketing initiative. But the strategy was solid, the presentation was polished, and the potential ROI was too compelling to ignore. 6 restaurants signed on immediately, and within 3 months, the collaborative campaign had generated enough buzz and revenue that 4 more restaurants asked to join. The success of the restaurant initiative caught the attention of Austin Business Journal, which ran a feature story about innovative marketing approaches in the local food industry. The article mentioned my work prominently, describing Catalyst Digital Solutions as a boutique consultancy that's proving small businesses don't have to think small when it comes to sophisticated marketing strategy. That article changed everything. My phone started ringing with inquiries from businesses I'd never heard of, entrepreneurs who'd read about my work and wanted to discuss their own marketing challenges. Within 6 months, I'd hired 2 employees and moved into a real office space in the 2nd Street district. The growth was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. I was working 16-hour days, learning about contract negotiations and team management and cash flow analysis on the fly. There were moments when I felt completely overwhelmed, when I'd sit in my new office at 10 o'clock at night wondering if I was in over my head. But there were also moments of pure satisfaction that I'd never experienced in any other job. Like when a client called to say that our campaign had helped them secure a major partnership deal. Or when one of my employees told me that working at Catalyst was the first job where she felt like her ideas truly mattered. Or when I'd look at our client roster and realize that we were genuinely making a difference in the success of dozens of local businesses. The personal transformation was as significant as the professional one. I started dressing differently, not because I was trying to impress anyone, but because I wanted my appearance to reflect the confidence I was developing. I bought a car that was reliable and professional, rather than flashy. I moved to a larger apartment downtown. Not a penthouse, but a space that felt like home, rather than just a place to sleep between workdays. Most importantly, I started thinking differently about success. Tyler's version of success had been about external validation, about impressing others and fitting into established hierarchies. But building Catalyst taught me that real success was about creating value, solving problems, and building something sustainable that could grow beyond my own limitations. By my first anniversary as an entrepreneur, Catalyst had 12 employees and was generating 7 figures in annual revenue. We'd expanded beyond local restaurants to work with tech startups, healthcare practices, professional services firms, and retail businesses throughout Texas. I'd been invited to speak at 3 business conferences and had been featured in Inc. magazine's 30 Under 30 Inches list for innovative entrepreneurs. But the moment I realized how far I'd really come happened on a Tuesday morning when I was reviewing potential office expansion options with my real estate agent. We were looking at a space in the Frost Bank Tower, 15 floors up with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view that rivaled any corner office in the city. "This is beautiful," I said, walking around the empty space and imagining where my team would sit, where we'd put the conference room, how the morning light would fill the space. "But isn't it a bit ambitious? We're growing, but this seems like a space for a much larger company." My agent, a sharp woman named Patricia who'd worked with several successful Austin startups, looked at me with amusement. "Emma, you do realize that Catalyst's projected revenue puts you in the top 5% of businesses in Austin, right? You're not a small startup anymore. You're a legitimate mid-sized company with significant market presence." That perspective shift was crucial because it prepared me for what happened next. 3 months after moving into our new office space, I got a call that would have seemed impossible 2 years earlier. The caller was Harrison Webb, CEO of a Dallas-based investment firm that specialized in acquiring promising consulting and marketing companies. Harrison had been tracking Catalyst's growth and was interested in discussing investment opportunities. "We're not looking to buy you out," Harrison explained during our first phone conversation. "We're looking for strategic partnerships with companies that have strong fundamentals and growth potential. Our typical approach is to provide capital and operational support in exchange for partial ownership, with the goal of scaling successful businesses to the next level." The fantastic conversation led to a series of meetings that were unlike anything I'd experienced before. Harrison's team conducted due diligence on every aspect of Catalyst's operations, from our client contracts to our employee satisfaction scores to our proprietary methodologies. They analyzed our market position, our competitive advantages, and our expansion potential with the kind of sophisticated business analysis that I'd only read about in Harvard Business Review articles. The process was intense and occasionally overwhelming, but it also validated everything I'd built. When sophisticated investors are willing to bet their money on your company's future, it confirms that your success isn't accidental or temporary. It's real, substantial, and sustainable. The partnership deal we eventually negotiated gave Harrison's firm a 30% stake in Catalyst, in exchange for $2 million in growth capital and access to their network of business contacts and operational expertise. The agreement also included provisions for additional investment rounds as Catalyst continued to expand. But the most significant part of the deal wasn't the money or the strategic support. It was the acquisition budget that Harrison's backing provided. With their capital and credibility behind us, Catalyst was now positioned to acquire smaller consulting firms and expand our service offerings through strategic partnerships. Which brought us back to that Thursday morning phone call from Morrison & Associates. When Jennifer Kim called to discuss a potential partnership, I realized that the wheel had come full circle in a way that Tyler could never have anticipated. Morrison & Associates was a respected firm, but they were struggling with the same challenge that many traditional consulting companies faced. Their expertise was strong in established business practices, but they lacked the digital marketing capabilities that modern clients increasingly demanded. Meanwhile, Catalyst had built exactly the kind of digital transformation expertise that Morrison needed, and we had the capital and growth trajectory to make strategic acquisitions. What Jennifer didn't know when she made that call was that I wasn't just interested in a partnership, I was interested in buying them out entirely. The initial meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday at Morrison's offices downtown. I spent the weekend preparing, not just reviewing Catalyst's capabilities and growth projections, but also researching Morrison's recent performance, client retention rates, and market position. What I discovered was a company that had been slowly losing ground to more innovative competitors, despite their reputation and established client relationships. Monday evening, I called Harrison to discuss strategy. They think they're interviewing us for a junior partnership, I explained, but their financials suggest they need a lifeline more than they need a vendor. What are you thinking? Harrison asked. I'm thinking we go in prepared to offer them a buyout. Full acquisition, with retention packages for key employees and a transition plan that preserves their client relationships while integrating their capabilities with ours. Harrison was quiet for a moment. That's a bold move, Emma. Are you sure you're ready to manage an acquisition of that scale? I thought about Tyler, about the night he told me I was still figuring things out, about how certain he'd been that Vanessa represented the kind of success I could never achieve. I'm ready. Tuesday morning arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of Austin weather that makes everything feel muted and contemplative. I dressed carefully, choosing a navy suit that conveyed authority without being flashy, and arrived at Morrison & Associates 15 minutes early. The lobby was exactly what I'd expected. Understated elegance, expensive furniture, the kind of professional atmosphere designed to reassure clients that they were working with a serious, established firm. The receptionist directed me to a conference room on the 8th floor, where Jennifer Kim was waiting with 2 colleagues and a spread of coffee and pastries that suggested they were trying to make a good impression. Emma, thank you so much for coming, Jennifer said, standing to shake my hand. I'd like you to meet Robert Chen, our operations director, and Tyler Bennett, one of our senior associates who's been leading our expansion planning. Tyler stood up from his chair at the far end of the conference table, and for a moment time seemed to pause. He looked exactly the same as he had 18 months ago, maybe a little more tired around the eyes, his dark hair still perfectly styled, his smile still automatically charming. But something was different in his expression when he saw me, a flicker of surprise and uncertainty that he tried to cover with professional courtesy. Emma, he said, extending his hand across the table. It's good to see you. I shook his hand briefly, keeping my expression neutral and professional. Tyler. If Jennifer noticed any tension, she didn't acknowledge it. She launched into a presentation about Morrison's history, their client base, and their interest in expanding their digital services capabilities. Tyler contributed occasionally, describing market research they'd conducted and strategic priorities they'd identified, his voice careful and measured. I listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions about their current technology infrastructure, their employee retention rates, and their plans for scaling their operations. But part of my attention was focused on Tyler, watching how he interacted with his colleagues, noting the deference in his tone when he spoke to Jennifer, observing the careful way he was watching me. After 30 minutes of presentations and questions, Jennifer leaned forward with a smile. So Emma, tell us about Catalyst. We've heard impressive things, but we'd love to hear directly from you about your approach and your vision for potential collaboration. I opened my leather portfolio and pulled out the presentation I'd prepared, but instead of launching into the standard pitch about Catalyst's services and methodology, I decided to be direct. Before we discuss collaboration, I said, meeting Jennifer's eyes, I think there's something you should know about my relationship with your firm. Tyler's face went slightly pale, but I continued. Tyler and I have a personal history. We dated for 3 years, and our relationship ended about 18 months ago. I want to be transparent about that connection before we proceed, because I believe in conducting business relationships with complete honesty. Jennifer blinked, clearly not having expected this revelation. She glanced at Tyler, who was staring down at his hands, then back at me. I appreciate your transparency, Emma. Does this personal history affect your interest in working with Morrison & Associates? Not at all, I said calmly. In fact, it might give me unique insight into your company's strengths and growth potential. What I didn't say, what I kept to myself, was how surreal it felt to be sitting in that conference room being courted by the firm where Tyler worked, knowing that I was about to propose an acquisition that would fundamentally change the power dynamic between us. For the next hour, I presented Catalyst's capabilities with the kind of confidence and expertise that I'd developed over 18 months of building a successful company from scratch. I showed them our client portfolio, our revenue growth, our proprietary methodologies, and our expansion plans. I described the partnership with Harrison's investment firm and the acquisition budget that positioned us to pursue strategic growth opportunities. By the time I finished, the room was quiet in a way that suggested I'd exceeded their expectations significantly. Robert was taking notes furiously, and Jennifer was leaning back in her chair with an expression that looked like she was recalculating everything she'd thought she knew about this meeting. Tyler hadn't said anything for the last 20 minutes, but I could see him processing what he'd just heard. When I'd talked about Catalyst's 7-figure revenue and 12-person team and office in the Frost Bank Tower, his eyebrows had risen incrementally. When I'd mentioned the investment partnership and acquisition budget, he'd started tapping his pen against his notepad in a rhythm I remembered from our college days, something he did when he was nervous or trying to solve a complex problem. This is all very impressive, Emma, Jennifer said finally. Much more substantial than we'd anticipated. It sounds like Catalyst would be an excellent partner for our digital expansion initiatives. I smiled and closed my portfolio. Actually, Jennifer, I'd like to propose something different. The room went completely silent. Instead of a partnership, I'd like to discuss acquiring Morrison & Associates entirely. Tyler's pen stopped tapping. Robert's note-taking ceased mid-sentence. Jennifer's professional composure faltered for just a moment before she recovered. I'm sorry, Jennifer said carefully. Did you say acquiring us? That's correct. Based on my research into Morrison's financials and market position, I believe Catalyst is in a strong position to offer a full buyout that would benefit both companies. You'd gain access to our digital capabilities and growth capital, while we'd gain your established client relationships and traditional consulting expertise. I pulled out a second set of documents, the preliminary acquisition proposal that my lawyer and I had prepared over the weekend. This is obviously just an initial framework, subject to due diligence and negotiation, but I wanted to put the option on the table. Jennifer accepted the documents with hands that were slightly unsteady, but her voice remained professional. This is certainly not what we expected, but we're always open to exploring strategic opportunities. We'll need time to review this proposal and discuss it with our senior partners. Of course, I said, standing up and gathering my materials. Take all the time you need. You have my contact information. As I headed toward the door, Tyler finally spoke up. Emma, could I have a quick word? Privately? I paused, considering. Jennifer and Robert were already absorbed in the acquisition proposal, whispering to each other and flipping through pages. All right. Tyler followed me out into the hallway, closing the conference room door behind him. For a moment, we just stood there, two people who had once planned a future together, now facing each other as business adversaries in a corporate corridor. When did this happen? Tyler asked quietly. When did what happen? When did you become someone who can walk into a room and casually propose buying out an established consulting firm? I looked at him for a long moment, remembering the last time we'd had a serious conversation, when he'd told me I was still figuring things out and needed to be with someone who matched his ambitions. I became that person, I said finally, about 18 months ago. Tyler ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I remembered from countless conversations during our relationship. I had no idea you were building something this significant. You never asked. That landed like I'd intended it to. Tyler's face flushed slightly and he looked down at his shoes. Emma, I owe you an apology. The way I ended things, the things I said about your career and your potential, I was wrong. Yes, I agreed simply. You were. I thought I was being realistic about what we both needed to be successful. I thought Vanessa represented the kind of partnership that would help me grow professionally. How did that work out? Tyler's smile was rueful. Not the way I expected. Vanessa is brilliant and accomplished, but we never connected the way you and I did. She ended things after 6 months when she got recruited by a firm in Silicon Valley. Apparently my ambitions weren't impressive enough for her long-term goals. I felt a flicker of satisfaction, followed immediately by something that might have been sympathy. I'm sorry that didn't work out the way you hoped. Are you? I considered the question honestly. I'm sorry you got hurt, but I'm not sorry it didn't work out, because if it had, I might never have discovered what I was actually capable of building on my own. Tyler nodded slowly. You built something incredible, Emma. I'm genuinely impressed. Thank you. Are you really going to buy us out? I smiled for the first time since entering the building. That depends on whether your partners are smart enough to recognize a good deal when they see one. The acquisition process took 3 months to complete. Morrison's partners initially balked at the idea of being purchased by a company that was smaller and newer than their own firm. But their financial situation was worse than they'd admitted, and Catalyst's offer was too generous to refuse. The final deal gave Catalyst full ownership of Morrison and Associates, with retention packages for all existing employees and a transition plan that preserved client relationships while integrating the firm's capabilities. Jennifer Kim was offered a senior partnership role in the merged company, and Robert Chen became our new operations director. Tyler was offered a position as well, reporting directly to me as the CEO of the merged organization. The day we signed the final paperwork, I stood in what was now my conference room, looking out at the Austin skyline and thinking about the conversation that had started this entire journey. Tyler had told me that success wasn't always what it appeared to be, and that I'd figure that out soon enough. He'd been right, just not in the way he'd expected. Success, I had learned, wasn't about impressing other people or fitting into their definitions of accomplishment. It wasn't about having the right credentials or driving the right car or living in the right neighborhood. Success was about building something meaningful, creating value for others, and developing the confidence to take risks that scared you. 2 weeks after the acquisition was finalized, Tyler knocked on my office door and asked if we could talk. I gestured to the chair across from my desk, the same chair where I'd interviewed dozens of potential employees over the past year. I've been thinking about your offer, he said. Take your time. It's a big decision. Emma, I need you to know that I don't expect this position because of our history. If you're offering it because you feel sorry for me, or because you want to prove something, I'd rather find something else. I leaned back in my chair and studied his face. Tyler looked older than he had 18 months ago, more uncertain, less assured about his place in the world. But there was also something more genuine in his expression, a humility that hadn't been there when we were together. I'm offering you the position because you're good at what you do, I said honestly. You understand traditional consulting, you have strong client relationships, and you know how to manage complex projects. Those are skills that the merged company needs. Even though I'll be reporting to you, especially because you'll be reporting to me. Tyler was quiet for a moment. Can I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever think about what might have happened if I hadn't been such an idiot? If I'd supported your ambitions instead of dismissing them? I considered the question seriously. Sometimes. But Tyler, the thing is, I don't think I would have pushed myself to build Catalyst if I hadn't been forced to prove that I could succeed on my own terms. Your rejection hurt, but it also freed me from trying to fit into someone else's vision of what my life should look like. So in a weird way, I did you a favor? In a weird way, you did. Tyler smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him since walking into Morrison's conference room. Then I guess my complete failure as a boyfriend had some unexpected benefits. Don't give yourself too much credit, I said, smiling back. I did the actual work. 3 months later, Tyler was settling into his new role as senior project manager for the merged company's traditional consulting division. He was good at the job, just as I'd expected, and he worked well with the rest of the team. Our professional relationship was cordial and productive, built on mutual respect rather than romantic history. We never talked about getting back together. Tyler was dating someone new, a teacher from South Austin who seemed to genuinely appreciate his sense of humor and didn't care about his professional trajectory. I was focused on managing the challenges and opportunities of running a rapidly growing company. But there were moments, usually late in the evening when we were both still at the office working on different projects, when I'd catch Tyler watching me with an expression that was part admiration and part regret. He never said anything about those moments, and neither did I. The truth was, we'd both become different people than we'd been during our relationship. Tyler had learned that impressive credentials and ambitious partners weren't the same thing as genuine connection and mutual support. I'd learned that I didn't need anyone else's validation to build something meaningful and successful. On the first anniversary of the acquisition, I threw a company party at a rooftop venue downtown. The entire team was there, along with key clients and business partners, celebrating what had become one of Austin's most successful marketing consultancies. During my toast, I talked about the importance of taking risks, believing in your own vision, and surrounding yourself with people who challenge you to grow. As I looked out at the crowd of employees and clients and friends, I realized that I'd built exactly the kind of life I'd always wanted. One where my ideas mattered, where I could make a meaningful difference, and where I was valued for who I was, rather than who I was supposed to be. Tyler was there, standing near the back of the crowd with his new girlfriend, applauding politely. When our eyes met across the room, he raised his glass in a small salute that acknowledged everything that had happened between us and everything we'd both learned since. I raised my glass back, then turned to continue my speech about the future of the company and the exciting projects we had planned. I didn't dwell on the past, because I'd learned that the best revenge isn't proving someone wrong about you. The best revenge is proving yourself right. The first morning I woke up as the founder of Catalyst Digital Solutions, I made myself coffee in my tiny kitchen and stared at the business cards I'd ordered online the night before. They were simple, clean, nothing fancy because I couldn't afford fancy. But seeing my name, followed by founder and CEO, felt like putting on clothes that were simultaneously too big and exactly the right size. David Chen had warned me that the first 6 months would be the hardest, that most consulting firms failed within their first year because founders underestimated the difference between being good at the work and being good at running a business that did the work. He was right about the difficulty, but he hadn't prepared me for how addictive the challenge would become. My first real lesson in entrepreneurship came 3 weeks after incorporating, when Maria Gonzalez called me at 7 a.m. in a panic. Her bakery's Instagram account had been hacked, and whoever had gained access was posting inappropriate content that had nothing to do with pastries. Her followers were confused and angry, her reputation was being damaged in real time, and she needed someone to fix it immediately. I'd never dealt with a social media crisis before, but I threw on clothes and drove to her Westlake location, where Maria was pacing behind the counter with her phone in one hand and a cup of coffee that had clearly gone cold hours ago. Her morning customers were arriving for their usual orders, and several had mentioned seeing strange posts on her social media. "Emma, I don't know what to do," she said, her usual confidence replaced by genuine distress. "I built this business over 15 years, and some hacker is going to destroy my reputation in one morning." I spent the next 4 hours learning about social media crisis management in real time. I called Instagram's business support line 6 times before reaching someone who could help. I drafted statements for Maria's other social platforms explaining what had happened. I created a temporary landing page on her website with information about the Security breach. Most importantly, I sat with Maria and helped her personally call her biggest regular customers to explain the situation before they saw the compromised posts. By noon, we'd regained control of the account, removed all the inappropriate content, and posted a clear explanation of what had happened, along with enhanced security measures we were implementing. The crisis was contained, but the experience taught me something crucial about consulting. Clients don't just pay you for your expertise. They pay you to remain calm and solution-focused when they're panicking. That afternoon, Maria wrote me a check for emergency consulting hours that was twice what we'd originally agreed upon for monthly services. "You didn't just fix my problem," she told me. "You made me feel like everything was going to be okay when I thought my business was falling apart." That's when I understood what I was really selling. I wasn't just offering marketing strategy or digital solutions. I was offering peace of mind to business owners who had too much at stake to handle these challenges alone. Word about the Instagram crisis spread through Austin's small business community faster than I expected. Within 2 weeks, I had inquiries from 5 other local business owners who wanted to discuss their own social media vulnerabilities and crisis preparation plans. None of them had experienced a hack, but they'd all heard Maria's story and realized they were unprepared for similar emergencies. I developed what I called digital defense audits, comprehensive reviews of a business's online presence that identified security vulnerabilities, backup procedures, and crisis response protocols. The service combined technical analysis with strategic planning, and it gave me a way to work with multiple clients simultaneously while building recurring revenue relationships. The defense audits led to my first major breakthrough. One of my audit clients was Rebecca Torres, who owned a small chain of fitness studios that was rapidly expanding across Central Texas. During her audit, I discovered that her 3 locations were operating with completely different social media strategies, inconsistent branding, and no coordinated marketing efforts. "Rebecca," I said during our results meeting, "you're running 3 separate businesses when you could be running one business with 3 locations. Your marketing should be leveraging the success of each studio to support the others." I proposed a comprehensive rebranding project that would unify her studios under a single marketing strategy while maintaining the unique personality of each location. The project would include new logo design, website development, coordinated social media management, and a customer loyalty program that encouraged members to visit multiple locations. Rebecca was intrigued but concerned about the investment. The unified marketing strategy I was proposing would cost more than she'd ever spent on marketing for all 3 studios combined. "Emma, this sounds incredible, but I'm not sure I can afford this kind of investment." I'd been thinking about this conversation for weeks, knowing that many of my potential clients were in similar situations. They needed sophisticated marketing support, but they couldn't afford the upfront costs of major campaigns or rebranding projects. "What if we structured it differently?" I suggested. "Instead of paying everything up front, what if you paid a base fee for the strategy development and implementation, then a percentage of any revenue growth we can directly attribute to the new marketing initiatives?" Performance-based pricing was risky for me because it meant I only got paid in full if my strategies actually worked. But it also meant that my clients had much less financial risk, and my success was directly tied to their success. Rebecca agreed to the arrangement, and within 6 months, her unified marketing strategy had increased cross-location membership by 40% and overall revenue by 28%. More importantly, the success of Rebecca's project established my reputation for delivering measurable results, not just creative campaigns. When other business owners asked Rebecca about her marketing transformation, she could point to specific numbers that proved the investment was worthwhile. By the end of my 6th month in business, I had 12 active clients, 2 part-time contractors helping with social media management and content creation, and more inquiries than I could handle alone. I was working from a shared workspace in East Austin, but I was spending so much time in client meetings that I rarely used my desk anyway. The decision to hire my first full-time employee was both exciting and terrifying. Sarah Kim was a recent graduate from UT's advertising program who had reached out after reading about my work in a local business publication. She was smart, creative, and hungry to prove herself, but hiring her meant committing to payroll expenses and benefits costs that would significantly impact my cash flow. David Chen advised me to wait until I had at least 6 months of operating expenses in the bank before taking on permanent employees. I had about 3 months' worth saved, but I was losing potential clients because I couldn't handle the workload alone. Sometimes the safe choice isn't the smart choice. Sarah's first day coincided with my biggest client challenge yet. Austin Food and Wine magazine wanted to launch a digital marketing campaign for their annual festival, an event that attracted over 50,000 visitors and featured more than 100 local restaurants, wineries, and food vendors. The festival had always relied on traditional advertising and word-of-mouth marketing, but they were facing increased competition from similar events in other cities. The magazine's editor, James Rodriguez, explained their situation during our initial meeting. "We've got great content, loyal attendees, and strong vendor relationships, but our online presence is basically non-existent. We need to reach younger audiences and expand beyond our traditional customer base without losing the authenticity that makes this festival special." The Austin Food and Wine Festival project required everything I'd learned about digital marketing over the past year, plus capabilities I'd never developed before. The campaign needed to include social media strategy, influencer partnerships, content marketing, email campaigns, paid advertising, and coordination with dozens of participating vendors who had their own marketing priorities. Sarah and I spent 2 weeks developing a comprehensive strategy that would position the festival as Austin's premier culinary event while highlighting the unique personalities of individual vendors. We proposed creating a content series featuring behind-the-scenes videos with participating chefs, interactive social media campaigns that let attendees vote on festival activities, and partnership opportunities with local food bloggers and lifestyle influencers. The proposal was ambitious and complex, requiring coordination between multiple platforms and stakeholders. When I presented it to James and the festival's organizing committee, I could see both excitement and skepticism in their faces. "This is exactly what we need," James said, "but it's also much more comprehensive than anything we've attempted before. Do you really think you can coordinate all of these moving pieces?" I thought about Tyler's assessment of my capabilities, about how he'd seen me as someone who is still figuring things out, still experimental and unproven. But I also thought about Maria's Instagram crisis, and Rebecca's studio rebranding, and the 12 other clients who had trusted me to solve problems they couldn't handle themselves. "Yes," I said simply, "we can absolutely coordinate this campaign, and we can deliver results that exceed your expectations." The festival campaign launched 6 weeks later and became the most successful digital marketing initiative I'd executed to date. Our social media content reached over 200,000 people in the weeks leading up to the event. The behind-the-scenes video series generated engagement rates that were 3 times higher than typical food content. Most importantly, festival attendance increased by 32% compared to the previous year, with significant growth in the 25 to 35 age demographic that the organizers had been trying to reach. The success of the festival campaign established Catalyst as a serious player in Austin's marketing landscape. Within a month, I had inquiries from event organizers, retail businesses, and professional services firms throughout Texas. I hired 2 more employees and moved into a proper office space in the 2nd Street district, close enough to downtown to be convenient for client meetings but affordable enough to maintain healthy profit margins. The office move felt like a genuine milestone, the first time I had a professional space that reflected the quality of work we were producing. The space was modest but well-designed, with a conference room for client meetings, individual offices for the team, and a common area where we could collaborate on projects. Most importantly, it was ours, not shared with other businesses or temporary arrangements. My parents visited the new office 2 weeks after we moved in, and I could see their surprise at how professional and established everything looked. They'd been supportive but concerned when I'd told them about starting my own business, worried that I was making a risky decision that might hurt my long-term career prospects. "Emma, this is incredible," my mother said, looking around the conference room where we'd hung examples of our best campaign work. "I had no idea you were building something this substantial." That evening, they took Sarah and me to dinner at one of Austin's nicest restaurants, and my father asked detailed questions about our business model, our growth plans, and our competitive advantages. He'd owned a small accounting firm for most of my childhood, and I could see him evaluating Catalyst with the kind of professional assessment that came from decades of business experience. "You're doing something that most entrepreneurs never manage," he told me over dessert. "You're building a business that creates real value for your clients while maintaining sustainable economics. That's much harder than it looks." The validation from my parents meant more than I'd expected, partly because they understood the challenges of small business ownership in ways that my friends from college couldn't, but it also marked a shift in how I thought about my own success. I was no longer trying to prove that I could build something meaningful. I was focused on how to grow and improve what I'd already created. The next major growth phase came when I decided to expand beyond local Austin clients. Texas had dozens of mid-sized cities with thriving business communities that needed sophisticated marketing support, but couldn't access it locally. Cities like San Antonio, Fort Worth, El Paso, and Corpus Christi had entrepreneurs and business owners facing the same challenges as my Austin clients, but they were working with less experienced consultants or trying to handle everything themselves. I spent a month driving around Texas, meeting with business owners in different cities, and learning about their specific markets and challenges. The trip was part market research and part business development, designed to understand whether Catalyst's approach would work outside of Austin's unique ecosystem. What I discovered was that small and mid-sized businesses everywhere were dealing with similar digital marketing challenges, but many were further behind than Austin companies because they had less access to experienced consultants and fewer examples of successful digital strategies in their local markets. In San Antonio, I met with Linda Martinez, who owned a successful catering company that provided services for corporate events and weddings throughout South Texas. Linda had been trying to expand her business through social media marketing, but she was struggling to create content that showcased her work effectively and reaching potential clients beyond her existing network. "I know my food is incredible," Linda told me during our meeting at her commercial kitchen facility, "but I don't know how to translate that quality into online content that convinces people to hire me for their events." I spent the afternoon with Linda's team, watching them prepare for a corporate event that evening and understanding the level of artistry and professionalism that went into their work. The food was indeed incredible, but more than that, the entire operation demonstrated attention to detail and creative problem-solving that would appeal to exactly the kind of high-end clients Linda wanted to reach. I proposed a content strategy that would highlight not just the finished dishes, but the entire experience of working with Linda's team, from initial consultation through event execution. We'd create video content showing the preparation process, client testimonials discussing the planning experience, and portfolio galleries that demonstrated the range and sophistication of their work. The San Antonio project became our first successful expansion outside of Austin, and it established a template for working with clients in other Texas markets. Within 6 months, we had clients in 4 different cities and were generating enough revenue to justify opening a satellite office in San Antonio. But the project that really established Catalyst as a regional player came when we were approached by TechStart Alliance, an organization that provided resources and support for technology startups throughout Texas. TechStart was planning to launch a statewide initiative to promote Texas as a destination for tech companies considering relocation or expansion outside of traditional hubs like Silicon Valley and Seattle. The project required developing marketing materials and strategies that could effectively communicate Texas's advantages to sophisticated technology executives, while highlighting specific opportunities in different markets throughout the state. It meant working with economic development officials, existing tech companies, universities, and government agencies to create a coordinated message about Texas's technology ecosystem. "This is the kind of project that could establish us as a major consultancy," Sarah told me as we reviewed the proposal requirements. "But it's also much more complex than anything we've handled before. We'd basically be marketing an entire state." She was right about both the opportunity and the complexity. The TechStart project would require capabilities we'd never developed, partnerships with organizations we'd never worked with, and a level of strategic thinking that went far beyond individual client campaigns. But it also represented exactly the kind of challenge that had driven me to start Catalyst in the first place. I wasn't interested in building a consulting firm that only handled safe, predictable projects. I wanted to tackle problems that forced us to grow and innovate and develop new capabilities. The proposal process took 6 weeks and required input from specialists in economic development, technology policy, and corporate relocation decision-making. We interviewed executives from companies that had recently moved operations to Texas, analyzed successful economic development campaigns from other states, and developed a comprehensive strategy that addressed both the rational and emotional factors that influence corporate expansion decisions. When we won the TechStart contract, it validated everything I'd believed about Catalyst's potential. We weren't just a local marketing consultancy anymore. We were a firm capable of handling complex, high-stakes projects that required sophisticated strategic thinking and flawless execution. The TechStart campaign launched 8 months later and included everything from targeted advertising in technology publications to executive recruitment events in major tech hubs to content series featuring successful companies that had already made the move to Texas. The campaign exceeded every performance metric we'd established and resulted in documented relocations and expansions that created over 1,500 jobs throughout the state. More importantly for Catalyst's future, the success of the TechStart project established our reputation among the kind of clients who represented the next level of business opportunity. We started receiving inquiries from Fortune 500 companies, major economic development organizations, and consulting firms that were looking for specialized digital marketing expertise. By the end of my second year in business, Catalyst had grown to 15 employees, offices in Austin and San Antonio, and annual revenue that exceeded anything I'd imagined when I started. We'd worked with over 60 clients, launched campaigns in 12 different industries, and developed proprietary methodologies that consistently delivered measurable results. But the growth also created new challenges that I hadn't anticipated. Managing a team of 15 people required different skills than working with 3 or 4 collaborators. Coordinating projects across multiple locations meant developing systems and processes that ensured consistent quality regardless of which team members were involved. Most importantly, maintaining the company culture and values that had made Catalyst successful while scaling operations and expanding into new markets required constant attention and intentional decision-making. I started working with an executive coach, Patricia Williams, who specialized in helping entrepreneurs navigate the transition from startup founders to established business leaders. Patricia had built and sold 2 successful consulting firms herself, and she understood the specific challenges that came with rapid growth in the professional services industry. The skills that make you successful as an entrepreneur aren't necessarily the same skills that make you successful as a CEO, Patricia explained during our first meeting. You've proven you can identify opportunities, build client relationships, and deliver excellent work. Now you need to develop capabilities around strategic planning, organizational development, and scaled operations. Working with Patricia helped me understand that Catalyst's continued success would require evolving my own role within the company. Instead of being involved in every client project and every operational decision, I needed to focus on strategic direction, business development, and building systems that allowed the team to deliver excellent work without my direct involvement. The transition wasn't easy. I'd started Catalyst because I loved the creative and strategic aspects of marketing consulting, and moving into a more traditional CEO role meant spending less time on the work that had originally motivated me. But it also meant creating opportunities for team members like Sarah to take on more responsibility and develop their own expertise. Sarah had grown tremendously during her 2 years with Catalyst, evolving from a recent graduate who needed close supervision to a senior strategist who could lead major client projects independently. When I offered her the position of Director of Strategy, she accepted enthusiastically but also raised an important question. Emma, I love working here and I'm excited about this opportunity, but I want to make sure Catalyst continues to feel like the kind of place where people can grow and take on meaningful challenges. How do we maintain that culture as we keep expanding? It was exactly the right question, and it forced me to articulate something I'd been thinking about but hadn't fully defined. Catalyst's success wasn't just about our marketing expertise or our client results. It was about creating an environment where talented people could do their best work while building something meaningful together. I spent the next month developing what became known as the Catalyst Culture Code, a document that outlined our values, our approach to client relationships, and our commitment to supporting each team member's professional growth. The Culture Code wasn't just a human resources document. It was a strategic framework that guided our hiring decisions, our project selection, and our expansion planning. One of the key principles in the Culture Code was our commitment to taking on projects that challenged us to grow and develop new capabilities. We wouldn't accept work that felt routine or unchallenging. regardless of how profitable it might be. We wanted every project to teach us something new and push us to deliver better results than we'd achieved before. That principle was tested when we received an inquiry from Harrison Webb's investment firm about potential partnership opportunities. Harrison had been tracking Catalyst's growth and was interested in discussing investment and expansion possibilities. The conversation with Harrison's team was unlike any business discussion I'd experienced before. They analyzed Catalyst's financials, market position, competitive advantages, and growth potential, with the kind of sophisticated business analysis that I'd only read about in case studies. They understood the consulting industry, the digital marketing landscape, and the specific factors that determine long-term success in professional services. Catalyst has exactly the kind of fundamentals we look for in investment opportunities, Harrison explained during our third meeting. Strong client relationships, proprietary methodologies, sustainable economics, and leadership that understands both the creative and business aspects of consulting. The partnership structure they proposed would provide capital for expansion while maintaining Catalyst's independence and culture. Harrison's firm would take a minority ownership position in exchange for growth funding and access to their network of business contacts and operational expertise. But the most intriguing aspect of their proposal was the acquisition budget it would provide. With Harrison's backing, Catalyst would be positioned to acquire smaller consulting firms and expand our service offerings through strategic partnerships. We're not interested in buying firms just to increase our size, I explained to Harrison. But if we could find consulting companies that complement our capabilities and share our values, strategic acquisitions could accelerate our growth while creating better opportunities for both teams. Harrison nodded. That's exactly the kind of strategic thinking that made us interested in partnering with Catalyst. You understand that sustainable growth comes from building capabilities and relationships, not just increasing revenue. The partnership agreement took 3 months to negotiate, but the final deal positioned Catalyst for the kind of expansion that would establish us as a major player in the Texas consulting market. We now had the capital and credibility to pursue opportunities that would have been impossible as an independent startup. Which brought us to the phone call from Morrison & Associates, and the opportunity to come full circle in a way that Tyler never could have anticipated when he told me I was still figuring things out and would never amount to the kind of success that someone like Vanessa represented. As I prepared for that meeting with Tyler's firm, I realized that the woman who had been devastated by his rejection 2 years earlier was completely different from the CEO, who was now considering acquiring his company. The journey from that empty apartment to this corner office hadn't just been about building a successful business. It had been about discovering who I was when I stopped trying to fit into someone else's definition of success and started creating my own. Tyler had been wrong about my potential, but in a strange way, his rejection had been the catalyst that forced me to discover what I was actually capable of achieving. If he'd supported my ambitions and encouraged my entrepreneurial dreams, I might never have developed the independence and confidence that ultimately made Catalyst's success possible. The irony wasn't lost on me that the same woman Tyler had dismissed as not serious enough about her career was now in a position to determine his professional future. But as I reviewed the acquisition proposal one final time before the meeting, I realized that my motivation wasn't revenge or vindication. My motivation was continuing to build something meaningful. And if acquiring Morrison & Associates would strengthen Catalyst's capabilities while creating opportunities for their team, then it was simply the next strategic step in our evolution. Success, I'd learned, wasn't about proving other people wrong about you. Success was about proving yourself right. Walking into the Morrison & Associates building on that Tuesday morning felt like stepping into a memory that belonged to someone else. The marble lobby with its understated elegance, the security desk where I had to sign in as a visitor, the elevator that carried me up to the 8th floor where Tyler worked every day, all of it represented a world that had once intimidated me and now felt strangely small. I arrived 15 minutes early, not because I was nervous, but because punctuality was a habit I'd developed during 2 years of client meetings, where being late meant losing credibility before you even spoke. The receptionist directed me to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Austin, and I used those extra minutes to center myself and review the key points I wanted to make during the presentation. Jennifer Kim entered first, followed by Robert Chen, and then Tyler appeared in the doorway. For a moment that felt much longer than it actually was, we looked at each other across the conference table, two people who had once shared a bed and planned a future together, now meeting as business professionals, who happened to have a complicated history. Tyler looked exactly as I remembered him, perhaps a little more polished in his navy suit and carefully styled hair, but essentially unchanged. His smile was the same mixture of charm and calculation that had once made me feel special and later made me feel dismissed. When he extended his hand across the table, his grip was firm but brief, professional without being warm. "Emma," he said, and I could hear him trying to keep his voice neutral. "It's good to see you." "Tyler," I replied, matching his tone. "Thank you for including me in this meeting." If Jennifer noticed any tension between us, she didn't acknowledge it. She launched into Morrison's presentation with the kind of polished confidence that came from years of pitching to potential partners and clients. She talked about their history, their client base, their reputation in the Austin business community, and their strategic vision for expanding their digital capabilities. Tyler contributed to the presentation with occasional insights about market research and competitive analysis. But I could see him watching me carefully, trying to gauge my reactions and understand why Catalyst had been invited to this meeting. He spoke with the same measured intelligence that had impressed me when we were in college together, but there was something different in his demeanor, a carefulness that hadn't been there before. Robert Chen discussed Morrison's operational structure and their plans for integrating digital services with their existing consulting offerings. He was thorough and professional, but I could sense an underlying anxiety about the firm's financial position that wasn't being explicitly addressed in their presentation. When they finished their overview, Jennifer leaned forward with an expectant smile. "So Emma, we'd love to hear more about Catalyst and how you envision a potential partnership working." I opened my portfolio and pulled out the presentation materials I'd prepared, but before launching into the standard pitch about our services and capabilities, I decided to address the elephant in the room directly. "Before we discuss potential collaboration," I said, looking each of them in the eye, "I think there's something you should know about my relationship with your firm. Tyler and I have a personal history. We were in a relationship for 3 years, and that relationship ended approximately 18 months ago. I wanted to be transparent about this connection before we proceed with any business discussions." Jennifer's eyebrows rose slightly, and she glanced at Tyler before returning her attention to me. "I appreciate your honesty, Emma. Does this personal history impact your interest in working with Morrison and Associates?" "Not professionally," I said calmly. "In fact, it might give me unique insight into your firm's culture and potential." Tyler had gone very still. During this exchange, his hands folded carefully on the table in front of him. I could see him processing the implications of my presence at this meeting, trying to understand how the woman he'd left for being insufficiently ambitious had ended up being courted by his own firm as a potential partner. For the next hour, I walked them through Catalyst's evolution, from a one-person startup to a regional consulting firm, with offices in multiple cities and a client roster that included Fortune 500 companies. I showed them our revenue growth, our expansion timeline, our proprietary methodologies, and our strategic partnership with Harrison Webb's investment firm. Tyler's expression changed gradually as I presented our accomplishments. When I mentioned our annual revenue figures, his pen stopped moving across his notepad. When I described our client portfolio and the scope of projects we'd managed, he leaned back in his chair with a look I recognized from our college days when he was trying to solve a particularly complex problem. When I explained the investment partnership and the acquisition budget it provided, his face went completely blank. "This is significantly more substantial than we anticipated," Jennifer said when I finished the presentation. "Catalyst appears to be operating at a much larger scale than most of the firms we've been considering for partnership." "That's correct," I agreed. "Which is why I'd like to propose something different than a traditional partnership arrangement." The room became very quiet. Robert stopped taking notes. Jennifer's professional smile faltered slightly. Tyler was staring at me with an expression that I couldn't quite read. "Instead of exploring a partnership where Morrison and Associates would engage Catalyst as a digital services vendor," I continued, "I'd like to discuss the possibility of Catalyst acquiring Morrison and Associates entirely." The silence that followed was profound. Jennifer blinked several times before finding her voice. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I'm proposing that Catalyst purchase Morrison & Associates as a strategic acquisition that would benefit both organizations, I said, pulling out the preliminary acquisition proposal that my legal team had prepared. You would gain access to our digital capabilities, growth capital, and operational expertise. We would gain your established client relationships, traditional consulting capabilities, and experienced team members. Tyler finally spoke, his voice careful and measured. Emma, Morrison & Associates has been operating successfully for over 15 years. We have established relationships with major clients throughout Texas and a reputation for excellence in business consulting. I'm aware of your firm's history and reputation, I replied evenly. I'm also aware of your current financial position, your client retention challenges, and the competitive pressure you're facing from firms that have successfully integrated digital capabilities with traditional consulting services. I could see from Robert's expression that my assessment was accurate. Morrison & Associates was a respected firm, but they were struggling with the same challenges that many traditional consulting companies faced in an increasingly digital marketplace. They had expertise and relationships, but they lacked the technological capabilities and innovative approaches that modern clients demanded. Jennifer recovered her composure first. This is certainly an unexpected direction for our conversation. We'd need to review any formal proposal carefully and discuss it with our senior partners. Of course, I said, sliding the acquisition proposal across the table. This is preliminary framework, subject to due diligence and negotiation. I wanted to put the option on the table for your consideration. Tyler was reading through the proposal with intense concentration, his jaw tightening as he absorbed the financial terms and integration plans that my team had developed. When he looked up, his expression was a mixture of shock and something that might have been respect. When did this happen? He asked quietly. What happen? When did you become someone who walks into established firms and proposes buying them out? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with all the history and assumptions that had defined our relationship and its ending. I could see in Tyler's face that he was remembering the night at Moonshine when he'd told me I was still figuring things out, still experimental, not ready for the kind of serious partnership that someone like Vanessa could provide. I became that person gradually, I said, meeting his eyes directly. Through necessity, determination, and the discovery that I was capable of much more than either of us realized. Jennifer and Robert were watching this exchange with obvious fascination, clearly recognizing that they were witnessing something more complex than a standard business negotiation. I could see them exchanging glances and trying to understand the dynamics playing out in their conference room. I think we need some time to process this proposal, Jennifer said diplomatically. It's obviously a significant decision that would require extensive discussion among our partners. Absolutely, I agreed, standing up and gathering my materials. Take whatever time you need. You have my contact information for any questions or clarifications. As I prepared to leave, Tyler spoke up again. Emma, could I have a brief word with you privately? I paused, considering. Jennifer and Robert were already absorbed in examining the acquisition documents, whispering to each other about financial projections and integration timelines. All right. Tyler followed me out into the hallway, closing the conference room door behind him. We stood there for a moment, two people who had once been intimately connected, now facing each other as representatives of competing business interests. I need to understand something, Tyler said, his voice lower than it had been during the meeting. How long have you been planning this? Planning what? This acquisition. This reversal of our positions. This moment where you walk into my workplace and offer to buy my firm. I looked at him carefully, trying to read whether his question came from genuine curiosity or some assumption that my presence here was motivated by personal revenge rather than business strategy. Tyler, I learned about Morrison & Associates' interest in digital partnerships exactly when Jennifer called me last week. I had no idea you worked here until I walked into that conference room an hour ago. His face showed surprise, then confusion. But the timing, the symmetry of you being in a position to acquire us, it's too perfect to be coincidental. It's not coincidental, I agreed. It's inevitable. You left me because you thought I lacked the ambition and capability to be successful by your standards. But your standards were based on a very narrow definition of what success looks like. While you were focused on impressing people like Vanessa and climbing hierarchies within established firms, I was building something from scratch. Tyler ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I remembered from countless conversations during our relationship. Emma, I owe you an apology. The way I ended things, the things I said about your career prospects, I was wrong. Yes, you were wrong. But Tyler, I'm not here to collect apologies or prove points about our past relationship. I'm here because Catalyst is positioned to make strategic acquisitions, and Morrison & Associates represents exactly the kind of traditional consulting expertise that would complement our digital capabilities. Are you saying this is purely a business decision? I considered the question honestly. It's primarily a business decision, but I'd be lying if I said there wasn't some satisfaction in demonstrating that the woman you dismissed as insufficiently ambitious is now in a position to determine your firm's future. Tyler was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the implications of what had just happened. What about Vanessa? He asked finally. What about her? Didn't you want to prove something to her as well? I smiled for the first time since entering the building. Tyler, Vanessa recommended Catalyst to your firm. She's been praising our work to potential business partners for months. I don't need to prove anything to her because she already recognizes the value of what we've built. That revelation hit Tyler like a physical blow. I could see him processing the information, realizing that the woman he'd left me for was now effectively endorsing my professional capabilities to his own colleagues. She never mentioned knowing you, he said weakly. Why would she? Vanessa evaluates business relationships based on professional merit, not personal history. She's recommended Catalyst because our work delivers results for her projects, not because she cares about our romantic history. The hallway was empty except for us, but I could hear the soft murmur of Jennifer and Robert's voices through the conference room door, undoubtedly discussing the acquisition proposal and its implications for their firm's future. Emma, I need you to know that when I ended our relationship, I genuinely thought I was making a mature decision about compatibility and shared goals. I thought Vanessa represented the kind of partnership that would help both of us grow professionally. How did that work out? Tyler's laugh was rueful and self-deprecating. About as well as you'd expect. Vanessa is brilliant and accomplished, but she ended our relationship after 6 months when she decided my career trajectory wasn't impressive enough for her long-term goals. Apparently, my position at Morrison & Associates didn't represent the kind of ambitious partnership she was looking for. I felt a flicker of sympathy, followed immediately by the recognition that Tyler had experienced exactly the same dismissal he'd given me, judged by the same superficial standards he'd used to evaluate my worth as a partner. I'm sorry that relationship didn't work out the way you hoped, I said, and meant it. Are you really? I'm sorry you were hurt, but I'm not sorry it didn't work out, because if it had, I might never have been forced to discover what I was actually capable of building on my own. Tyler nodded slowly, as if he was beginning to understand something that had been unclear before. You're saying that my rejection was actually beneficial for your development. I'm saying that your rejection forced me to stop trying to fit into someone else's definition of success and start creating my own. That process was painful, but it was also liberating in ways I couldn't have imagined when we were together. The conference room door opened, and Jennifer appeared in the hallway. Emma, we've finished our initial review of the proposal. Would you be available for a follow-up conversation later this week? Absolutely, I said, returning to my professional demeanor. I'll have my assistant coordinate scheduling with your office. As I walked toward the elevator, Tyler called after me. Emma, one more question. I turned back to face him. Are you really going to acquire us? I smiled with genuine confidence. That depends on whether your partners are smart enough to recognize a good opportunity when they see one. The elevator arrived, and I stepped inside, watching Tyler's face as the doors closed between us. He looked like someone who was trying to solve a puzzle that had more pieces than he'd originally realized. The ride down to the lobby gave me a moment to process what had just happened. The meeting had gone better than I'd hoped, not just because Morrison's partners seemed genuinely interested in the acquisition proposal, but because the conversation with Tyler had provided a kind of closure that I hadn't realized I needed. For 18 months, I'd carried some residual uncertainty about whether Tyler's assessment of my potential had been accurate. Even as Catalyst grew and succeeded, part of me had wondered if I'd simply gotten lucky or if my success was somehow less legitimate than the kind of achievement that Vanessa represented. But seeing Tyler's shock at discovering what I'd built, witnessing his struggle to reconcile the ambitious CEO he'd just met with the girlfriend he'd dismissed as insufficiently serious, had finally put those doubts to rest. I hadn't gotten lucky, I hadn't built something less legitimate. I'd simply built something different, something that didn't fit the narrow template of success that Tyler had been taught to recognize. That evening, I called Harrison Webb to update him on the meeting and discuss next steps for the potential acquisition. Harrison listened carefully to my summary of Morrison's financial position and operational challenges, asking detailed questions about their client relationships and competitive position. "It sounds like they're exactly the kind of firm that could benefit from Catalyst's capabilities and growth capital," Harrison said when I finished my briefing. "But more importantly, it sounds like acquiring them would give you the traditional consulting expertise you need to compete for larger projects." "That's my assessment as well," I agreed. "The question is whether their partners will be able to overcome their pride and recognize that being acquired by a younger firm is actually their best strategic option." "Pride is expensive in business," Harrison observed. "Most successful entrepreneurs learn to set it aside when the numbers make sense." Over the next 3 days, I received 2 phone calls from Morrison & Associates. The first was from Robert Chen, asking detailed questions about Catalyst's operational procedures and integration approach for acquired firms. The second was from Jennifer Kim, requesting a more comprehensive presentation about our post-acquisition plans and transition timeline. Both calls suggested that Morrison's partners were taking the acquisition proposal seriously, but they also revealed some of the internal dynamics that were shaping their decision-making process. Robert seemed primarily concerned with preserving job security for existing employees, while Jennifer was focused on maintaining Morrison's reputation and client relationships during any transition process. Tyler didn't call, but I hadn't expected him to. This was a business decision that would be made by Morrison's senior partners, not by individual associates. His personal feelings about being acquired by his ex-girlfriend's company were irrelevant to the strategic and financial considerations that would determine the firm's response to our proposal. The second meeting was scheduled for the following Monday, this time in Catalyst's conference room with Harrison Webb participating via video conference to discuss investment and integration details. I spent the weekend preparing financial projections and transition plans that would address the specific concerns that Robert and Jennifer had raised during their follow-up calls. Jennifer arrived at our offices with Robert and 2 additional Morrison partners I hadn't met before, along with Tyler, who was apparently responsible for presenting their analysis of our proposal. The group looked slightly overwhelmed by Catalyst's modern offices and sophisticated presentation technology, as if they were recalibrating their assumptions about our size and capabilities. "Thank you for hosting us," Jennifer said as I led them into our main conference room. "We've spent considerable time reviewing your acquisition proposal, and we'd like to discuss some specific aspects of the integration plan." What followed was 2 hours of detailed negotiation about financial terms, employee retention, client transition procedures, and operational integration. Harrison participated remotely, providing investment expertise and answering questions about Catalyst's growth strategy and long-term vision. Tyler contributed to the discussion with insights about Morrison's client relationships and competitive positioning, but I could see him struggling to adapt to his role in a conversation where his firm was essentially being evaluated for purchase by mine. He answered questions professionally but avoided making direct eye contact with me, as if he was still processing the reversal of power dynamics that the acquisition represented. The turning point came when Jennifer asked about Catalyst's plans for Morrison's existing leadership structure. "Obviously, this kind of acquisition raises questions about management roles and decision-making authority," she said carefully. "How would you envision integrating our senior team with your existing organizational structure?" "I'd envision Morrison's senior partners taking on leadership roles within the expanded organization," I replied. "Your expertise in traditional consulting is exactly what we need to complement our digital capabilities. The goal isn't to replace your leadership, but to combine our strengths." Robert leaned forward with interest. What would that look like in practical terms? I pulled out organizational charts that my team had prepared, showing how Morrison's partners could assume responsibility for different service lines within the merged company. Jennifer would oversee business strategy consulting, Robert would lead operations for both firms, and other Morrison partners would head up specialized practice areas. This structure preserves your existing client relationships and expertise while giving you access to Catalyst's digital capabilities and growth capital, I explained. It's designed to be additive rather than replacement. Tyler spoke up for the first time in over an hour. What about existing Morrison associates? What happens to junior-level employees during this integration? I looked directly at him for the first time since the meeting began. Every existing Morrison employee would be offered a position with the merged company, with salary and benefits that are equal to or better than their current compensation. Our goal is to retain talent, not eliminate positions. Including junior associates? Tyler pressed. Including everyone who wants to be part of what we're building together. After the Morrison team left, Harrison stayed on the video call to debrief about the meeting and discuss our negotiating position. They're interested, he said bluntly, but they're also scared. This represents a fundamental change in their business model and their professional identities. What do you think they'll decide? I think they'll accept our offer, but they'll need time to come to terms with what it means. Jennifer strikes me as someone who understands business strategy, and the numbers clearly favor acquisition over trying to build digital capabilities independently. Harrison was right. The call came on Wednesday afternoon, 3 days after our second meeting. Jennifer's voice was professionally neutral, but I could hear underlying relief when she said, "Emma, Morrison's partners have voted to accept Catalyst's acquisition proposal. We'd like to move forward with due diligence and formal negotiations." The acquisition process took 2 months to complete, involving lawyers, accountants, and consultants who analyzed every aspect of both companies' operations, finances, and strategic positions. It was complex and occasionally tedious, but it culminated in the signing ceremony that officially made Morrison & Associates a division of Catalyst Digital Solutions. Tyler was offered a position as senior project manager in the merged company's traditional consulting division, reporting to Jennifer, who became our vice president of business strategy. He accepted the offer without negotiating terms or asking for special considerations, perhaps recognizing that his alternatives were limited and that working for my company represented his best option for career advancement. The day we signed the final paperwork, I stood in what was now my expanded conference room, looking out at the Austin skyline and thinking about the journey that had brought me from that painful conversation at Moonshine to this moment of professional vindication. Tyler had told me that night that he needed someone who matched his energy, someone who was already successful, someone who shared his ambitious vision for the future. He'd been wrong about my potential, but he'd also been wrong about what success actually looked like and how it was achieved. Real success, I'd learned, wasn't about impressing other people or fitting into their definitions of accomplishment. It wasn't about having the right credentials, or working for prestigious firms, or dating people who enhanced your professional image. Real success was about identifying problems that mattered, developing solutions that created value, and building something sustainable that could grow beyond your individual limitations. Tyler knocked on my office door that afternoon, asking if we could speak privately. I gestured to the chair across from my desk, the same desk where I had made hundreds of decisions over the past 2 years about hiring, strategy, client relationships, and company growth. "I've been thinking about our conversation last week," he said, settling into the chair with visible nervousness. "About your offer of a position with the merged company." "Take whatever time you need to consider it," I replied. "It's a significant decision. Emma, I need you to understand that I don't expect this position because of our personal history. If you're offering it out of sympathy, or because you want to prove some point about forgiveness, I'd rather find opportunities elsewhere." I studied his face, noting the genuine uncertainty in his expression. Tyler looked older than he had 2 years ago, less confident, more aware of his own limitations and the complexity of professional success. "I'm offering you the position because you're good at traditional consulting," I said honestly. "You understand client relationship management, you can analyze complex business problems, and you have experience managing projects across multiple stakeholders." Those are valuable skills that the merged company needs. Even though I'll be reporting to you, especially because you'll be reporting to me." Tyler was quiet for a moment, processing the implications of working for the woman he'd once dismissed as insufficiently ambitious. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever think about what might have happened if I'd been more supportive of your entrepreneurial goals? If I'd encouraged your business ideas instead of pushing you toward more traditional career paths?" I considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. But Tyler, I honestly don't think I would have developed the independence and determination that made Catalyst successful if I hadn't been forced to prove myself entirely on my own terms. So in a strange way, my rejection actually helped you? My rejection forced me to stop seeking external validation and start building something that reflected my own values and vision. That process was painful, but it was also essential for my development as an entrepreneur and a leader." Tyler smiled ruefully. "Then I guess my complete failure as a supportive partner had some unexpected benefits." "Don't give yourself too much credit," I said, returning his smile. "I did the actual work of building this company." 3 months later, Tyler had settled into his role managing client relationships for our traditional consulting projects. He was competent and professional, working effectively with other team members, and contributing to the successful integration of Morrison's capabilities with Catalyst's digital expertise. We maintained a cordial but strictly professional relationship, collaborating on projects when necessary, but avoiding personal conversations about our shared history. Tyler seemed to understand that our working relationship depended on maintaining clear boundaries between past personal connections and current business responsibilities. The merged company exceeded our first quarter projections, landing several major clients who needed both traditional business consulting and sophisticated digital marketing capabilities. The acquisition had achieved exactly what I'd hoped, combining complementary expertise to create a more comprehensive service offering that neither company could have provided independently. But the most satisfying aspect of the acquisition wasn't the financial success or the strategic advantages. It was the recognition that I'd built something substantial enough to acquire an established firm, sophisticated enough to manage complex integration challenges, and valuable enough to attract the kind of talent that had once seemed beyond my reach. One evening, as I was reviewing quarterly reports in my office, I found myself thinking about that night at Moonshine, when Tyler had told me I was still figuring things out, still experimenting, not ready for serious partnership with someone who shared his level of ambition. He'd been partially right. I had been figuring things out. But what he'd failed to understand was that figuring things out independently, discovering your own capabilities through trial and challenge, building something meaningful from your own vision and determination, was actually a much more valuable process than fitting into someone else's predetermined template for success. Tyler had wanted a partner who was already established, already impressive, already successful by conventional standards. But conventional success, I'd learned, often meant accepting other people's definitions of what mattered and limiting yourself to opportunities that had already been validated by others. The unconventional path, the experimental approach, the willingness to figure things out as you went along, those weren't signs of immaturity or lack of seriousness. They were prerequisites for building something truly innovative and meaningful. As I locked my office door and headed home to my downtown apartment, I realized that Tyler had given me an invaluable gift, though not in the way he'd intended. His rejection had freed me from the need to impress him, to fit his expectations, to succeed according to his standards. It had forced me to discover what I actually wanted to build, and who I actually wanted to become. And what I'd discovered was that I was capable of much more than either of us had imagined. 6 months after the acquisition, I was reviewing applications for our new scholarship program when Tyler knocked on my office door. The Catalyst Foundation had launched the previous month, offering full college scholarships to young women from underserved communities who showed entrepreneurial potential but lacked the resources to pursue higher education. "Emma, do you have a moment?" Tyler asked, holding a folder in his hands. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. Over the past half year, our working relationship had settled into something comfortable and professional. Tyler had proven himself to be exactly what I'd expected, competent, reliable, and genuinely skilled at client relationship management. More importantly, he'd adapted to reporting to me without the awkwardness or resentment I'd initially worried might surface. "I wanted to talk to you about the Richardson Industries project," he said, opening his folder to reveal detailed project notes and client feedback forms. "They've requested an expansion of our services to include digital transformation for their manufacturing processes. It's outside the scope of our original consulting agreement, but it could be a significant opportunity." I reviewed Tyler's analysis, noting the thorough research he'd conducted and the strategic thinking behind his recommendations. His work had improved considerably since joining Catalyst, perhaps because he was finally in an environment that valued innovation and strategic problem-solving over office politics and hierarchy management. "This is excellent work, Tyler," I said, meaning it. "Richardson has been one of our most important clients, and expanding our relationship with them would strengthen our position in the manufacturing sector." "There's something else," Tyler continued, his tone becoming more personal. "I wanted to thank you for the opportunity to work on projects like this. The work we're doing here is more meaningful than anything I handled at Morrison's original structure." I looked up from the project documents. "What do you mean?" "At Morrison, we were mainly focused on maintaining existing client relationships and delivering standard consulting solutions. Here, we're actually solving complex problems and helping businesses transform themselves. It's the kind of work I always hoped I'd be doing but never had the chance to pursue." There was something different in Tyler's demeanor, a sense of genuine satisfaction that I'd rarely seen during our relationship. He seemed more grounded, less concerned with impressing others or positioning himself for advancement, more focused on the actual substance of his work. "I'm glad you're finding the work fulfilling," I said. "Building something meaningful was always important to me, but it's equally important that everyone on the team feels like they're contributing to something worthwhile." Tyler nodded, then hesitated before speaking again. "Emma, I owe you an acknowledgement that I've never properly given. What you built with Catalyst, the way you identified opportunities and created solutions that didn't exist before, it's exactly the kind of vision and execution that I claimed to value but never actually understood." I set down the project folder and gave him my full attention. "When we were together, I thought success meant fitting into established structures and impressing the right people," Tyler continued. "I thought Vanessa represented the kind of achievement I should aspire to because she had credentials and status that looked impressive from the outside. And now? Now I understand that real accomplishment comes from building something new, not from climbing someone else's ladder. You didn't just achieve success by conventional standards. You redefined what success could look like." I appreciated Tyler's honesty, but I also recognized that his understanding had come through experience rather than explanation. He'd needed to work within an organization that prioritized innovation and value creation to understand why those principles mattered more than traditional markers of professional achievement. "Tyler, I think you're giving me too much credit," I said. "I didn't set out to redefine anything. I just focused on solving problems that seemed important and building relationships with people who shared similar values." "But that's exactly what makes it significant," Tyler replied. "You weren't trying to prove a point or make a statement. You were just doing work that mattered to you. And it turned out that kind of authenticity was much more powerful than any strategic positioning." After Tyler left my office, I returned to reviewing scholarship applications, but his words stayed with me. Reading through essays written by teenage girls who described their entrepreneurial dreams and community service projects, I realized that many of them reminded me of myself at their age, ambitious and creative but uncertain about how to transform their ideas into concrete opportunities. One application particularly caught my attention. Maria Santos, a 17-year-old from East Austin, had started a small business creating educational content for other Spanish-speaking students in her district. She'd identified a gap in available resources and developed innovative solutions using social media and peer-to-peer learning networks. Her essay described plans to expand the program to serve students throughout Texas, but she lacked the capital and connections to scale her impact. I called David Chen that afternoon to discuss the scholarship program and the caliber of applications we were receiving. David had agreed to serve on our selection committee, bringing his expertise in entrepreneurship and his commitment to supporting underserved communities. "The applications are incredible," I told him. These young women are already demonstrating the kind of innovative thinking and community focus that we hope to encourage. They just need resources and opportunities to develop their potential. That's exactly what this kind of program should accomplish, David replied. You're not just providing financial support. You're validating their vision and connecting them with a network of people who understand what they're trying to build. The Catalyst Foundation represented something important to me beyond its charitable mission. It was a way to ensure that other young women wouldn't face the same barriers and dismissals that I'd encountered, that they'd have access to mentorship and resources that could help them transform their ideas into sustainable enterprises. 2 weeks later, I hosted the first annual Catalyst Foundation Scholarship Ceremony at the downtown Hilton, bringing together recipients, their families, local business leaders, and members of Austin's entrepreneurial community. Maria Santos was among the 10 scholarship winners, and during her acceptance speech, she talked about plans to expand her educational content business into a full-scale nonprofit organization serving Latino students throughout the Southwest. Watching Maria speak, I realized that the most meaningful aspect of building Catalyst hadn't been the financial success or professional recognition. It had been creating something that could extend beyond my own achievements to support other people's dreams and ambitions. Tyler attended the scholarship ceremony along with other Catalyst team members, and afterward he approached me during the reception. "This is incredible, Emma," he said, gesturing toward the gathering of scholarship recipients and their families. "You've created something that's going to change these young women's lives." "We've created something," I corrected. "This foundation exists because Catalyst became successful enough to support it, and Catalyst's success has been a team effort from the beginning." "But the vision was yours," Tyler insisted. "The decision to prioritize meaning over profit, to build something that could give back to the community, that came from your values and your leadership." Looking around the reception, watching scholarship recipients talking excitedly with local entrepreneurs and business leaders, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with proving anyone wrong or demonstrating my capabilities. This wasn't about validation or vindication. This was about using the platform I'd built to create opportunities for others. 3 months later, I was featured on the cover of Austin Business Magazine in an article about entrepreneurs who were reshaping the city's business landscape. The photo shoot took place in Catalyst's offices, and the article described our evolution from a one-person startup to a regional consulting firm that was also making significant contributions to community development through our foundation work. The article mentioned Tyler briefly as one of our senior project managers, noting his background at Morrison & Associates and his contribution to our traditional consulting capabilities. Reading that reference, I realized that our professional relationship had become exactly what it should be: collaborative, productive, and focused on shared goals rather than personal history. That evening, I was working late in my office when Tyler stopped by to discuss a client proposal we were developing for the following week. As he prepared to leave, he paused at my door. "Emma, can I ask you something personal?" I looked up from my laptop. "Sure. Are you happy with how everything turned out, with the choices you made, with the life you've built?" I considered the question seriously. "Yes, I'm happy. Not because of what I proved or what I achieved, but because I'm doing work that feels meaningful with people I respect and trust. Do you ever wonder what might have happened if things had worked out differently between us?" "Sometimes," I admitted. "But Tyler, I think we both needed to become different people before we could appreciate what really matters. The relationship we had was based on who we thought we should be rather than who we actually were." Tyler nodded thoughtfully. "I think you're right. I'm grateful for the opportunity to work here and to see firsthand what you've built. It's helped me understand what I actually want from my career and my life." "What's that?" "The chance to contribute to something larger than my own advancement. To work with people who care more about impact than image. To build relationships based on mutual respect rather than strategic positioning." After Tyler left, I remained in my office for another hour. Not because I had urgent work to complete, but because I enjoyed the quiet space to reflect on how dramatically my life had changed over the past 3 years. The woman who had sat in that empty apartment after Tyler moved out, questioning her worth and potential, felt like a completely different person from the CEO who now ran a successful consulting firm and foundation. The journey from heartbreak to entrepreneurial success hadn't been linear or predictable. There had been moments of doubt, financial stress, professional challenges, and personal growth that pushed me beyond what I'd thought possible. But every difficult decision and uncertain step had contributed to building something authentic and sustainable. Most importantly, I'd learned that success wasn't about impressing other people or meeting their expectations. It wasn't about having the right credentials or working for prestigious organizations or dating partners who enhanced your professional image. Real success was about identifying your own values, pursuing work that aligned with those values, and building relationships with people who supported your authentic self rather than some polished version designed to fit external standards. Tyler had wanted a partner who was already impressive by conventional measures. He'd chosen Vanessa because she represented established success that he could admire and aspire to emulate. But established success, I'd discovered, often meant accepting other people's definitions of what mattered and limiting yourself to opportunities that had already been validated by others. The path I'd taken, building something from scratch based on my own vision and values, had been riskier and more uncertain. But it had also been more rewarding because it reflected who I actually was rather than who I thought I should become to impress someone else. As I gathered my things and prepared to leave the office, I felt grateful for Tyler's rejection in a way that would have seemed impossible 3 years ago. His dismissal had forced me to discover what I was capable of achieving independently, and that discovery had been worth every moment of uncertainty and challenge along the way. Walking to my car in the garage beneath our building, I thought about Maria Santos and the other scholarship recipients who were beginning their own journeys toward building meaningful careers and enterprises. They would face obstacles and setbacks, moments of doubt and external pressure to conform to conventional expectations. But they would also have opportunities to create something authentic and impactful, to define success on their own terms, rather than accepting someone else's template. That possibility, more than any personal vindication or professional achievement, represented the true measure of what I'd built with Catalyst. Success wasn't just about proving that I could achieve more than Tyler had imagined. Success was about creating opportunities for others to discover and develop their own potential without having to prove their worth to anyone else first. The next morning, I would return to my office, review new client proposals, meet with team members about ongoing projects, and continue building something meaningful that could extend far beyond my own ambitions. And Tyler would be there too, contributing his skills and experience to our shared mission, both of us finally working toward goals that reflected our authentic values, rather than external expectations. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. Tyler looked me straight in the eye across the candlelit table at Moonshine Patio Bar and said the words that would change everything. "Emma, let's be real. Vanessa has her life together. She owns a penthouse, drives a Tesla, has a corner office. You're still figuring things out, living in that tiny apartment, chasing pipe dreams. I need someone who matches my energy, someone who's already successful." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The live music from the stage seemed to fade into nothing. The laughter from nearby tables turned hollow. I sat there in my thrift store dress, the one I'd spent an hour picking out because I thought we were celebrating our 3-year anniversary, and watched the man I loved reduce me to a list of things I didn't have. But I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't even argue. I just smiled, picked up my purse, and said something that would haunt him for the next 2 years. "Tyler, success isn't always what it appears to be. But you'll figure that out soon enough. The thing about heartbreak is that it doesn't just happen in the moment someone breaks your heart. It happens in waves, over days and weeks, every time you remember something they said or realize something you overlooked." Tyler Bennett had been my world for 3 years. We met during our senior year at UT Austin in a business marketing class where he sat 2 rows behind me and would lean forward to whisper jokes during particularly boring lectures about consumer psychology. He was charming in that effortless way that made professors like him and made other students want to be around him. Dark hair that he was always running his hands through, green eyes that seemed to catch every detail, and a smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. When he asked me out after our final exam, suggesting coffee at Radio Coffee on Barton Springs Road, I thought I was the luckiest girl on campus. For 3 years, we built what I thought was a beautiful relationship. He was there when I graduated with my marketing degree, cheering louder than my own parents from the audience. He helped me when my grandmother passed away the summer after graduation, driving 6 hours to her funeral in East Texas without me even asking. We talked about moving in together, about getting a dog, about the marketing agency we'd start someday when we'd saved enough money. Tyler got hired at Morrison & Associates straight out of college, a prestigious consulting firm in downtown Austin, where junior associates started at $70,000 a year. I was proud of him, genuinely proud. He deserved it. He'd worked hard, networked strategically, and interviewed brilliantly. Meanwhile, I took a position at a small digital marketing startup in South Austin called Brightwave Creative, making $38,000 a year and working out of a converted warehouse space where the air conditioning barely worked and we had to jiggle the handle on the coffee machine to get it to brew. Tyler never said anything directly about the salary difference, but I felt it in small ways. When we'd go out to dinner, he'd automatically reach for the check, sometimes with this subtle sigh that made me feel like a burden. When I'd suggest going somewhere, he'd counter with something more expensive, then pay for it while saying things like, "Don't worry about it," in a tone that somehow made me feel smaller rather than grateful. But I loved him. I loved the way he'd text me good morning every day, even when he was traveling for work. I loved how he remembered that I preferred tea over coffee and would bring me chamomile when I was stressed. I loved our Sunday mornings at the farmers market on Republic Square, where we'd buy fresh flowers and plan our week together. I loved that he listened when I talked about my ideas for new marketing campaigns, even if he sometimes seemed distracted. The cracks started showing about 6 months before that night at Moonshine. Tyler had been working on a major project